Throwaway account for obvious reasons. I've lurked on this sub for years, reading other people's confessions like their campfire stories, and I always told myself I'd never be the guy writing one. But here I am. Name's William, not my real one, and this is about the time I forged signatures on documents that could have changed my life for better or worse. I risked everything to win, and at the time, that felt not just justified but inevitable. The short version is this: I was broke, cornered, and convinced I was smarter than the system. I'd spent years watching less capable people get ahead because they had access, family names, connections, a signature in the right place. I had none of that. What I did have was proximity to power, and a growing resentment that gnawed at me every time I followed the rules and still lost. The documents themselves were important enough that a single pen stroke carried weight, money, authority, futures tied up in ink. I wasn't some mastermind criminal, just a guy who told himself he was correcting an imbalance. "It's temporary," I said. "I'll fix it later." Those lies came easy back then. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a criminal. It crept up on me through small compromises, quiet rationalizations, and the constant pressure of feeling like time was running out. By the time the idea fully formed, it didn't feel outrageous anymore. It felt practical. Looking back, that's the scariest part, how reasonable it all seemed right before I crossed the line. Once the idea lodged itself in my head, it wouldn't leave. I didn't jump straight into action, that would have been reckless, and despite everything, I wasn't reckless, I was careful. Obsessively so. I spent weeks pretending nothing was wrong while mentally rehearsing every angle of what I was about to do. On the outside I was just William, doing his job, keeping his head down. On the inside, I was running simulations nonstop. Preparation, for me, wasn't about gadgets or movie-style schemes. It was about observation. I paid attention to habits, who signed what, when they were rushed, when they were distracted. I learned the rhythm of the place, the way papers moved from desk to desk, how often things were checked and how often they weren't. You'd be shocked how much relies on trust and routine. I also prepared myself emotionally, though I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. I practiced justifying it. I told myself stories about how no one would really get hurt, how this was just a shortcut to something I'd earn anyway. Every time doubt crept in, I smothered it with logic that sounded airtight when repeated often enough. There were nights I lay awake, heart racing, imagining worst-case scenarios, someone noticing, someone asking a question I couldn't answer. Those thoughts scared me, but they also sharpened my resolve. Fear became fuel. If I was going to do this, I needed to be calm, invisible, and precise. By the time the opportunity finally lined up, it felt less like I was making a decision and more like I was following through on one I'd already made weeks ago. The plan, such as it was, lived entirely in my head. And that's where it felt safest. The moment came disguised as an inconvenience. Someone called in sick, deadlines didn't move, and a thin stack of documents landed on my desk with a casual, "Can you handle this for now?" That was it. No dramatic music, no flashing warning signs. Just paper, ink, and expectation. My stomach dropped, not because I was surprised, but because I knew this was the opening I'd been waiting for. I remember how ordinary everything looked. The lights hummed softly overhead. Phones rang. People laughed down the hall. It felt almost insulting that the world didn't pause for what I was about to do. I'd built this up in my head as a pivotal moment, and reality treated it like Tuesday. I didn't act right away. That was rule number 1, never rush. I let the papers sit there while I went through the motions of normal work. Emails. Small talk. Coffee I didn't really taste. All the while, my awareness narrowed until those documents felt like they were glowing, calling to me without making a sound. What scared me most wasn't getting caught, it was hesitating. I knew if I let myself think too long, guilt or common sense might win. So I focused on mechanics, not meaning. This wasn't about consequences yet, it was about timing. About choosing the moment when everything lined up just right. When I finally picked up the pen, my hand didn't shake like I expected. That surprised me. If anything, I felt steady. Too steady. That calm should have been a warning, but at the time it felt like confirmation that I was built for this, that I was doing what I was supposed to do. I didn't know it then, but this was the last moment before things became irreversible. Once ink touched paper, there would be no pretending this was just a thought experiment anymore. I won't pretend I remember every detail of the signature itself, and honestly, that's probably my brain protecting me. What I do remember is the moment right before it happened, the pause where I stared at the paper and felt the weight of it press back. Names mean things. Signatures are promises. And I was about to fake one. I told myself to breathe, to keep it boring. That was my mantra: boring is safe. I didn't want this to feel dramatic or clever. I wanted it to feel like routine, like something that happened 1,000 times a day without anyone blinking. So I leaned into muscle memory, into repetition, into the idea that confidence could substitute for legitimacy. Time warped in that weird way it does when adrenaline kicks in. Seconds stretched, then snapped back into place. I was hyper-aware of sounds: the scrape of a chair, footsteps in the hallway, the copier whirring like it knew something I didn't. Every noise felt like a potential siren. When it was done, I didn't feel triumph. I felt suspension, like I'd stepped off a ledge and was waiting to see whether I'd fall or fly. The paper looked the same as it had before. No alarms. No gasps. The world stubbornly refused to acknowledge what I'd just done. I stacked the documents neatly, aligned the corners, and slid them into the outgoing tray with hands that still felt like they belonged to someone else. That small, mundane gesture, placing forged papers where they were meant to go, felt more incriminating than the act itself. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm officially not the person I was this morning. And the strangest part was how quickly that thought faded, replaced by the next worry, the next calculation. Once you cross a line, you don't stand there staring at it for long. You keep moving, because stopping means looking back. The real torture started after. Not during, not even right after. Those moments were wrapped in adrenaline and focus. It was the waiting that nearly broke me. Once the documents left my hands, I had nothing to do, and that absence of control was unbearable. Every email notification made my pulse spike. Every time someone said my name across the room, my stomach flipped like I'd been caught sneaking out as a kid. I replayed the scene in my head on a loop, searching for flaws I might have missed. Did I linger too long? Did I look nervous? Did anyone see me hesitate? What messed with me the most was how normal everyone acted. People complained about deadlines, joked about lunch plans, argued over trivial stuff. Meanwhile, I was walking around with this secret buzzing in my chest like live wire. It made me feel separate, almost superior in a sick way, like I was the only one who knew the truth about how fragile the whole system really was. I started adjusting my behavior without realizing it. Talking less. Smiling at the wrong times. Overcorrecting. I was terrified that acting different would be more suspicious than the crime itself. So I forced myself to be normal, whatever that meant. It was exhausting, performing innocence when you're not sure you deserve it. At night, the confidence I'd borrowed during the act evaporated. I'd lie awake imagining knock-on effects I couldn't control anymore, questions being asked, signatures being scrutinized, someone deciding to be thorough for once. I told myself that if nothing happened in a day, then a week, then a month, I'd be in the clear. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Even if no one ever found out, I'd crossed into a version of myself who now knew how easy it was to justify the unthinkable. And that knowledge didn't fade when the lights went out. About a week after it happened, the first crack appeared. Nothing dramatic, just a question. Someone from another department stopped by my desk, papers in hand, brow furrowed in that casual way people get when they're half curious, half bored. He asked me to clarify a date. A single date. I felt my body react before my mind did, heat rushing up my neck like I'd been slapped. I answered him. Calmly, I think. Too calmly. He nodded, thanked me, and walked away, and I sat there frozen, listening to his footsteps fade. That was the moment I realized how fragile my sense of safety was. One question had nearly unraveled me. One more, and I wasn't sure I'd hold it together. After that, I started seeing threats everywhere. A printer jam felt ominous. A closed-door meeting felt personal. I caught myself eavesdropping, reading too much into tone shifts and pauses. I was living in a constant state of low-grade panic, like a smoke alarm with dying batteries, never loud enough to act on, never quiet enough to ignore. I also started rehearsing explanations in my head, just in case. Innocent ones. Plausible ones. The kind that sounded reasonable even to me if I said them often enough. It felt like building a second version of reality I could step into if the first one collapsed. What surprised me was how quickly this became normal. Hypervigilance settled into routine. Anxiety into background noise. I hated it, but I adapted. Humans are good at that, adjusting to pressure until it feels like baseline. Still, there was this underlying dread that I couldn't shake, the sense that I'd set something in motion that no longer needed me. The papers were out there now, moving through hands and offices I'd never see. And I was just waiting. The illusion that I was in control didn't last. It never does. One afternoon, I overheard two people talking near the break room, low voices, serious tone. I didn't catch the full context, just fragments. Review, authorization, double check. My brain filled in the blanks with worst-case scenarios so fast it was dizzying. I told myself not to react, but my body didn't listen. My hands went cold. My chest tightened like someone had cinched a belt around my ribs. I stood there pretending to read something on my phone while my mind spiraled. This was it, I thought. This is how it starts. Not with accusations, but with process. What really got to me was realizing how little influence I had now. I couldn't pull the documents back. I couldn't explain them preemptively without raising suspicion. All I could do was wait and respond if, and only if, someone came to me directly. That kind of passive vulnerability is brutal when you're used to planning 3 steps ahead. I started questioning my own memory. Had I done everything as cleanly as I thought? Or was that confidence just another lie I'd told myself to cope? Doubt has a way of rewriting the past, turning certainty into something flimsy and unreliable. That night, I seriously considered confessing. Not because I felt morally compelled, but because I was tired. Tired of the constant vigilance, the mental gymnastics, the fear that bloomed out of nowhere. I imagined how it would feel to just let it fall apart, to stop holding everything together with white knuckles. But morning came, and with it, the familiar rationalizations. No one had said anything. No one had called me into an office. The world, once again, pretended nothing was wrong. And I took that silence as permission to keep going, even though some part of me knew I was digging deeper with every quiet day that passed out. By the second week, something unsettling happened. The fear dulled. It didn't disappear, but it stopped screaming and started whispering. That scared me more in hindsight than the panic ever did. I began to function again, eat lunch without nausea, hold conversations without mentally mapping exits. The crime was still there, but it had settled into the background like a bad smell you eventually stop noticing. I caught myself defending what I'd done in my own head, unprompted. Not just why I did it, but why it was, in some twisted way, necessary. I'd think about the inefficiencies, the bureaucracy, how a signature was just a formality everyone treated like gospel without questioning. If it went through, I told myself, then clearly it wasn't that important. That logic became a reflex. Anytime guilt surfaced, I smothered it with pragmatism. I even started feeling annoyed at the idea of being caught, like it would be an overreaction, a failure of perspective on their part. That shift, when I stopped seeing myself as someone who'd done a bad thing and started seeing myself as someone who'd outsmarted a flawed system, was subtle but dangerous. There were moments of pride, too, and I hate admitting that. Pride in how clean it had been. How no one suspected a thing. I look at the same people I used to envy and think, you don't even know how close this all is to falling apart. That thought gave me a rush I didn't ask for but didn't reject either. Still, late at night, when distractions ran out, I'd feel it, the weight of knowing I'd rewritten my own rules. Not broken them. Rewritten them. And once you do that, it's hard to pretend you're still playing the same game as everyone else. The first real consequence didn't come as punishment. It came as success. Things started moving faster, approvals cleared, plans advanced, doors that had been firmly shut cracked open just enough to let light through. People smiled more. Spoke about the future with certainty. And every time I saw that forward motion, I felt a knot twist in my stomach. Because I knew where it started. That was the part one hadn't fully prepared for, watching other people benefit from something rotten at its core. Colleagues talked excitedly about opportunities, about how this was finally working out. I nodded along, played my part, all while wondering if I'd poisoned the well without anyone realizing it yet. There was one moment that really stuck with me. Someone thanked me, not directly for the forgery, obviously, but for helping keep things on track. They said it casually, with genuine appreciation. I smiled, said something self-deprecating, and walked away feeling like I'd swallowed something sharp. It messed with my sense of responsibility. If things went well, was I the hero or the villain? If they went badly, would it all come back to me eventually? I started seeing futures branch out in my head, versions where this worked and versions where it imploded spectacularly. The uncertainty was suffocating. I also realized how entangled I'd become. The crime wasn't a single act anymore. It was a foundation. Everything that followed rested on it, which meant undoing it wasn't just impossible, it would be destructive. That trapped feeling came back stronger than ever. I'd risked everything to win, and now that winning seemed possible, I couldn't enjoy it. All I could think was how much there was left to lose. The closest call came out of nowhere. An internal review, routine, they said. Random, they said. I heard about it secondhand first, which somehow made it worse. There's a special kind of dread that comes from knowing something dangerous is happening without knowing how close it is to you. I was asked to sit in on a meeting. Not the meeting, just adjacent to it. That distinction mattered more to me than it should have. I sat there listening to people discuss processes, timelines, accountability. Words that had once been abstract suddenly felt sharp. Every time someone mentioned documentation, my brain lit up like a dashboard full of warning lights. At one point, a document I recognized, one I touched, was projected onto a screen. I kept my face neutral while my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest. Someone squinted at it, leaned closer, then shrugged and moved on. Just like that. No follow-up. No red flag. I don't know how long it took for my body to calm down after that. Hours, maybe days. I remember going home and sitting in the dark, fully dressed, replaying it over and over. That was the moment I truly understood how thin the margin was. Not between right and wrong, but between invisible and exposed. What scared me most wasn't how close I'd come to being caught. It was how relieved I felt afterward. The high was undeniable, and that realization made me deeply uncomfortable. I didn't like what it suggested about me, that survival, even through deception, could feel this good. After that, I stopped pretending this was a one-time lapse. Whatever I'd become, I was already it. And the scariest part was knowing that luck, not skill, not morality, was the only thing standing between me and consequences. After the near miss, the adrenaline stopped being fun. It curdled into something heavier, something that sat on my chest when I woke up and followed me to bed. I'd expected relief to carry me for a while, but instead it felt like I'd used up whatever emotional cushioning I had left. Every quiet moment became an echo chamber. I started noticing how the lie threaded itself into my identity. I'd censor stories mid-sentence, adjust timelines, avoid certain details, not because anyone asked, but because I was preemptively protecting myself. It's strange how a single act can teach you a whole new way to exist. I became a curator of my own life, editing for safety. People around me trusted me more, which felt cruel in a way I didn't know how to articulate. The version of William they saw was competent, reliable, unflappable. Inside, I was brittle. I flinched at praise. I overanalyzed compliments, wondering if admiration made the fall worse when it came. There were moments I considered walking away entirely, quitting, disappearing, starting over somewhere anonymous. But the benefits tied to what I'd done made that complicated. Leaving would raise questions. Staying meant living with the knowledge. Either way, the signature followed me like a shadow. I began to understand that getting away with something isn't the same as escaping it. The consequences don't always arrive with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes they show up quietly, in how you see yourself when no one else is looking, and in the constant effort it takes to keep the story straight, even in your own head. Time didn't expose me, but it did erode me. Months passed, and nothing happened. No investigations, no accusations, no whispered meetings behind closed doors. On paper, I'd won. In reality, I was fraying. The longer I carried it, the more I felt like I was living on borrowed legitimacy. Little things set me off. A pen left on a desk. Someone practicing a signature on a sticky note. Even the word, authorize, in an email subject line could knock the wind out of me for a second. I learned how memory embeds itself in places you don't expect, how guilt doesn't fade so much as it migrates. I tried to compartmentalize. Told myself that chapter was closed, that I didn't need to think about it anymore. But compartmentalization is just denial with better branding. The truth leaked through anyway, into my tone, my sleep, my patience. I was irritable with people who had nothing to do with it, and overly accommodating with those who did, as if kindness could somehow balance the scale. What really shook me was realizing I didn't know how I'd react if someone did confront me. I'd rehearsed explanations early on, but now? I wasn't sure I believed any of them anymore. The justifications had worn thin, and underneath them was a simpler, uglier fact: I'd wanted something badly enough to cheat for it. That acknowledgement didn't bring clarity or peace. It just made everything feel more exposed. I wasn't hiding from the system anymore. I was hiding from my own understanding of who I was becoming. I used to think there'd be a defining moment, a confrontation, a knock on the door, someone finally connecting the dots. Some clear line where everything before was tension and everything after was consequence. But that moment never came. And in a strange way, that absence became its own kind of punishment. Life just kept going. Promotions were discussed. New projects started. The forged documents faded into institutional memory, becoming just another line item no one questioned anymore. I watched it all from the inside, waiting for gravity to kick in, for the universe to correct itself. There's a unique loneliness in being the only person who knows the full story. I couldn't talk about it, couldn't confess without detonating everything I'd built, couldn't even fully forgive myself because there'd been no reckoning to anchor that forgiveness to. It was unfinished business with no ending. Sometimes I'd imagine alternate timelines, ones where I got caught early, faced consequences, and moved on cleaner for it. I envied those imaginary versions of myself. At least they'd know where they stood. I, on the other hand, was suspended in this moral limbo, technically successful and internally compromised. The longer nothing happened, the harder it was to justify the stress I still carried. If it was really that bad, a voice in my head would say, wouldn't something have happened by now? That voice sounded reasonable. That voice was dangerous. Because when you start using silence as evidence of innocence, you're not just lying to others anymore. You're rewriting the verdict in your own head. Somewhere along the way, I realized the crime wasn't the most significant change in my life. The aftermath was. I became more cautious, yes, but also more cynical. I stopped believing in clean lines between good and bad, success and failure. Everything felt negotiable now, like rules were suggestions backed by confidence and timing. I noticed it in small decisions. How easily I bent the truth when it was convenient. How quickly I assessed risk versus reward without the moral pause I used to have. I wasn't out there forging signatures again, but the door had been opened, and I knew it. Knowing you can do something and get away with it changes the shape of temptation forever. At the same time, I carried a quiet grief for the person I'd been before all this, the version of me who believed that doing things the right way would eventually be enough. That guy was naive, sure, but he slept better. He didn't second-guess every win or wonder what it said about him that he'd chosen the shortcut when it mattered most. I started measuring myself differently, not by what I achieved, but by what I was willing to live with. That metric is brutal because it doesn't care how impressive things look from the outside. It only asks whether you recognize yourself when no one's watching. By then, I understood that even if I was never caught, I'd already paid a price. Maybe not the one I deserved, maybe not the one people expect, but a real one all the same. And I knew this story wasn't finished yet, even if the world thought it was. I don't know if this counts as a confession or just a record, but writing it feels like drawing a line under something that's followed me for years. I got away with it, in the narrow, legal sense. No one knocked on my door. No file ever had my name circled in red. On paper, my life kept improving. Inside, it got more complicated than I expected. What I learned is this: the lie doesn't end when the act does. It stretches. It adapts. It asks you to become its caretaker. And the better things go, the harder it is to separate what you earned from what you took. That ambiguity eats at you in quiet moments, the ones without witnesses or distractions. If you're reading this and standing where I once stood, cornered, resentful, convinced the system is rigged and you're just leveling the field, I won't pretend I don't understand. I do. I live there. But understand this too: winning like that changes the definition of winning. It stops being about the outcome and starts being about whether you can live with the method. My advice isn't heroic. It's practical. Shortcuts don't stay short. They become routes you're expected to travel again, even if only in your head. And once you prove to yourself that you can cross a line, the line never looks as solid afterward. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not offering excuses. This is just one man's story about ink on paper and the cost that didn't show up on any balance sheet. If nothing else, let it stand as a warning. Sometimes the thing you risk everything to win isn't the thing that haunts you. It's who you become when no one stops you.